Kumlan about Gemara today. Yesterday's Daf Shabbos Daf is Daf Lamed Dalad. We'll also do Daf Lamed Hey. Sunday's Daf will make a pause in between. We're up to the Gemara here and the discussion of Shlokish Rabbi Yechon, and we have a new discussion here, Daf Lamed Dalad Amud Aleph, where it be right in the middle of the page, where it says Itmar. First word of the line is Mishnah Kaddish. It's right in the middle of the page. Itmar we learned. What happens? Hamala evore behema tmeya. What happens if you? The din is that if you put things on the mizbech, even though they're puzzle, once they put them on the mizbech, imola lo yedi. We learn from oila al make the mizbech. Once you put it on there, it remains over there. So what happens if you took a behema tmeya, a horse, a camel, that don't belong in the mizbech at all, and you took their limbs and you put it on the mizbech? The Shlokish says not only is it asa, which everyone agrees it's asa, but like you will get malchus. How do we know that? We'll see in a minute. And it's from an important rule. And Rabbi Yechon says, ain't no like. He says you don't get malchus. What's going on here? The Shlokish like you know why I get malchus? Because the Torah clearly says tahira in. It says in the pasuk min habokar min hatzoin takrivu. So it's a positive mitzvah only from kosher animals, and we're going to infer a lav from the asay. And halav, according to the Shlokish, it seems a lav that is born out of an asay by inference is enough to call it a lav, and you give it malchus. So therefore, the lav, I'm going to say, like again malchus. And Rabbi Yechon says, 1 second, we learned it out from an asay. We know you never get lashes for an asay, and therefore, even though the lav comes from an asay, it's still an asay. But Rabbi Yechon ain't like love. Lav, I'm going to say, ain't like love. So it seems they're arguing in the principle of if a lav that is born out of an asay, is that considered a lav, treated as a lav or not? Says the Gemara, how can anyone treat it as a lav? Moshe Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question. It says in Pasuk, it says it says about kosher animals. It says if there any animal that has only one sign, has two signs, you go ahead and you can eat it. So we darshan according to you, but if it's treif, then obviously not allowed to eat it. But the Brisa clearly says the Torah had to say elsewhere loy seichel should eat it, because if it only said this, it would have been a lav haba miklal asay, and that's considered an asay. So Meferish Brisa that if it's born out of an asay, it's an asay. You don't get malchus. You got it wrong. That wasn't the question of Shlaki Bar Chlifa. I'll explain you the question here is. We're talking about over here. If you put on the limbs of a camel or a horse, there's no argument that you're not a put on mizbech, and that you and that it's an aser, but you don't get malchus because the lav habom miklal asay is an asay. You know what argument here is? Ki pligi bechaya. The argument is that all the examples the Torah gives regarding it's been a behema, but sometimes we say that a chay is included in the behema. When it comes to kosher animals, a chay is included in the behema. So what happens? You put a chaya, a deer, on the mizbech. So what are they arguing? You keep pligi b'chaya. They're arguing with a chaya, and they're not arguing whether you get lashes or not. There's nothing to talk about. There's no lashes. Nowhere does the Torah say don't put a chaya. Question b'chalav is an avera. Who says Navera? Because a chay can be called included in the behemoth. Rabbi Yechon says, and here's faket. Before we were learning this, Shlokish was stricter than Rabbi Yechon. Here it's all the way around. Rabbi Yechon says, Oiva Basay is an asay here. And the Shlokish says, Eino Oiva B'lei Klum. There's no Aveda here at all. Rabbi Yechon Oiva say, Behemoth in Chayel. He doesn't say clearly Behemoth and gives him a bokum and a ton, means only a Behemoth, but not a Chayah. So you're Oiva Navera by putting a deer on the Mizbeach. The Shlokish says, Eino Oiva B'lei Klum. Why? Because ahu limits this that the Torah says the word behemoth, not that it's preferred, but if you didn't, you put a chaya, it's still kosher and it's still a good carbon. and how do we know that a tomadika animal cannot be brought on the mizbeach? Now that you tell me that behemoth is a preference, because it says we learned elsewhere. It says, at least according to Rashi, Faisal argues. It says we had it in Psachim, mashke Yisrael, that you should bring from the drink that's shaykh to Yisrael. Anything which is permitted for a yid to eat or consume, you put in mizbech. Anything which you cannot consume, you don't put in mizbech. Anyway, so Model has a question. Rav has a question. It says in the Braisa, Ilu Nemar, if it would have said Korban LaHashem Mina Behema, let's say it would not have said Bakar V'Tzayin. It would have just said Adam Yak. It says in Pasuk, I'm giving Yikra. Adam Ki Yakim Meken Korban LaHashem Mina Behema. And stop there. Don't give us all the examples from the cattle and the Tzayin and the Bakar and so on. And then it goes on to say, and if your carbon is from Bakar, it has to be male by Noila. If your carbon is from Tzayin, it has to be male. Just said la behema. I would have said chay b'chal behema. I would have said chay included. Kini shem etzel said the pasuk. Zois ha behema asher toichlu. This is what you can eat. Shoik sek sovim v'sayis. And these are the kosher animals. And it says it ayil v'tzvi. Clearly a ram and a deer. They're included in the behema. That's what I would have thought. Therefore, Tamalema, the pasuk says, Boker v'tzoyin. I'm limiting only the behemoths. V'loy chaya. Clearly. Then the Braisa continues. Yachol lo yavi. You shouldn't bring it. In other words, the mitzvah. It's a good idea to bring a behemoth, like Yeshlokish said before. But if kosher, but if you brought a deer or a ram, whatever, it would be kosher. So the Gemara says no. And why would you think it's kosher? The Taylor says behemoth, and you brought a deer, a chayah. Why would you think it's kosher? I would compare it. The Gemara is giving a reason why the Braisa is giving a reason why you think it's kosher. The Talmud his Rebbe said to him, bring me wheat. He brought wheat and barley, but he got his wheat, so it's not a big deal. Didn't betray him at all. Didn't violate his command. Teish right away asks, that's a bad example. He's not bringing her behemoth and a chaya. He's bringing only a chaya. This would be a case where you ask him for wheat, he brought you barley. So Teish says no, because you never asked me for anything. I volunteered to bring a carbon. You didn't tell me to bring an I did. So even though I brought a deer because I thought that this will make you happy, it's like you asked me for wheat and I gave you wheat and barley. A little bit stretching the envelope, but that's what it is. Ella Moisav Advara, because you'd be all right. That's how I thought. Maybe you do the deer. Talmud Loime Boker V'Tzoyin. It says again Boker V'Tzoyin twice. First of all, then it goes into detail. Even a Boker, this is the carbon. Even a Tzoyin is the carbon. To tell you Boker V'Tzoyin and Martla V'Loi Chaya. Only Boker V'Tzoyin, and not a Chaya. In fact, what would be a good example? A Talmud was told by his Rebbe, bring me only wheat, and and he brought wheat and barley. I told you only wheat, because I said it twice, and by Kotch, if you say something twice, it means only that. You're not adding, you're going against what I asked. No to you to the Shlokish. So it's a kasher Shlokish, because he said a chay is all right on his bech, just that it's not preferred. The Yufta Yitaka rejected, repudiated, and so on. The Mishnah said that if a person, the Mishnah gives 3 examples. If a coin that's possible receives the blood, if you passed on the blood to somebody is a puzzle, just take it back and start again. If you took it and you put it in your left hand, just put it in your right hand and continue. Or if you put it in a clay soil, just put it in a clay shutters in a proper keli and continue. 3, the principle is the same. Why do you give 3 examples? Says the Gemara, before we get to that, now Rish Lakish asks an interesting question for Rabbi Yechon. So our Mishnah says that you receive the blood, you can just fix it up. Fix it up. Receive more blood from the animal itself. So now he has an interesting question. Mao sheyase. We said if a postula kohen receives the blood, don't worry, you can still fix it by taking a kosher kohen, and if there's any blood left in the neck that's squirting out, as dam shah nefesh, take that blood. So the Shlokha has an interesting question. Okay, that's the stage of Kabbalah. What about when it comes to Zrika? Pasul mao sheyasa sharaim. What happens if a postula kohen sprinkled some of the blood? So this is now not the Kabbalah. Kabbalah Mishnah clearly says if you have more blood there, it's gushing out, no problem. I'm talking now about he sprinkled some of that blood, but he was puzzled. Can a kosher come now and sprinkle the rest of the blood? Do we say because he sprinkled the blood, which is a much more important avodah, because this is the matter, this is what makes the carbon. So he ruined it completely. It's nitche, it's rejected. You can no longer use it or not. So he said, what happens to the leftover blood? Can you use it or not? Amalei ein oisa sharaim. So Rabbi Yechon said a rule. You know when we say the sprinkling ruins the rest of the blood, if it was effective. Somehow it was effective. So for example, if this person was a postula kohen and you sprinkle blood, what do? Nothing. So then the rest of the blood is still good. But if this person was a kosher kohen, but he had in mind the wrong time. He had in mind the wrong date. He passes the carbon, but it was effective. It was effective because he did something. Now the rest of the blood is also not effective. Says the Gemara, only that kind of spraying, because he affected something with his pigul. We're Lamadal on the basis of Gemara Shabbos, and we're at Rish Lakish is asking Rabbi Yechon a question here. Well, the first version was if a apostle kohen went ahead. In our Mishnah clearly says if a apostle kohen receives the blood, if there's still more blood in the neck, a kosher kohen come along and accept that blood. He doesn't ruin the rest of the blood. Just whatever he did is no good. So we asked, what happened if apostle kohen did the zrika? He did not the Kabbalah, he did both. Rashi says Kibbul Vizon. But really the main question is he did the Zrika, he did the sprinkling. What happens to we say, well, we have more blood in the kais. A kosher kohen come along and fix it up, or do we say he made kala? Because the sprinkling is the matir, it's much more significant. So Rabbi Yechon laid down a rule. Where the sprinkling achieves something, even a psul, then it achieves something, it passes the rest. But if it didn't achieve anything, for example, if a apostle kohen sprinkled the blood, nothing happened. But if a kohen kosher went and sprinkled blood and had in mind chutz l'zmanoi, even though the korban is not kosher, but he affected something with his rika, he made something happen. Then he made kala, he ruins the rest of the blood. That's the first version of this question. The second version is like this: about the flower down base, 5 lines on top. Rabbi Zvid mas nahachi. Rabbi Zvid learned this is the question. This is what the Shlok says. Rabbi Yechon. Pois puzzle. What happens if the cup became puzzle? Not the koyin, we're talking about the cup. How? For example, you took the cup of blood outside of the Beis Hamikdash and then you brought it back in. Mao sheyasa shirayim. What happens to the rest of the blood? Do we say it ruins the rest of the blood or not? Amalei, so Rabbi Yechon said back to the Shlokish, you're asking me about the cup. Why aren't you asking about a koyin? If a koyin puzzle sprays some of the blood, what happens? Why don't you ask me about that? Amalei, what about puzzle gufa? What about the puzzle himself? My svidalach. No, in the first version, he asked about the puzzle. In the second version, he asked about a cup that's puzzle. And Rabbi said, why aren't you asking about a person? Obviously, you know the answer. But what is it? We don't know. So he said he follows. So my what do you hold by regarding the kohen himself? If you tell me a puzzle kohen ruins the rest of the blood, then kohen puzzle not a then why should a kohen puzzle same thing? You ruin some of the blood. It ruins the rest of the blood. And he puzzle loy mashirayim. If you tell me that if you hold that a puzzle kohen does not ruin the rest of the blood, which is what Rabbi Yechon said in the first version, unless he is effective, then kohen puzzle not mashirayim. In other words, I don't know. Whatever you thought about a kohen, use that same svara regarding the kohen puzzle. But the Gemara doesn't tell us what it is. So we go back to the first version. That where the apostle kohen sprayed the blood didn't achieve anything, nothing happens. If he was a kosher kohen who had in mind chutz l'zmani, chutz l'mekayim, where he ruins it, something happened, then we say that what apostle the rest. Says Gemara, talking about these shaylas, Rabbi Yemediv to Masne Hachi. Interesting. Rabbi Yemediv Masne Hachi sounds like his version of the question is different than the first two, but he has two different Amarayim. Boimene Abayim Merabah. So how you know we're talking about the same thing? We had exact same Gemara Brachas, where the Gemara talked about Friday night. A lot of Makabel Shabbos Friday night early, because since the Rav was Makabel Shabbos, whatever it is, and this Tana davened by this palm tree Friday night early. So the Gemara that says, first of all, it wasn't Friday night, it was Motzei Shabbos. Second of all, it wasn't this palm tree, it was a different palm tree. And third of all, it wasn't even that Tana, it was a different Tana. So you have to wonder, we're not talking about the same story. What are you asking me? You're talking to me about that Tana, I'll tell you about another Tana. Same over here. Masna Hachi means he's telling you that this is it doesn't say I have another question. Masna Hachi, I'm giving you another version. There was no Rabbi Yechon, there was no Reish Lakish, and there's a different question. Anyway, Abai asked a Rabba question. Now, they did it as follows. Any blood left over in the cup when you're spraying on the Mizbeach, that leftover blood, you have to pour it down the Yisoid. On the Mizbeach itself, on the ramp, there was a whole chute where you pour down the blood. Leftover blood that you gushed out of the neck, whatever it is, nothing to do with the Mizbeach, went down on the floor. There was an ammo, the water, the canal came through, and they used to wash the floors, and it just went out. So Abai wants to know, what happens if you had two cups, and you only end up using one of the cups? What happens to the other cup? So you took the cup to spray, to do zrika on the Mizbeach, but then you didn't need it, because you had one cup. What's the status of the other cup? Does the status of the cup say, this is a kaish for zrika, and you have to pour it down the Yisoid? Or do we say, no, that it goes down thing? Yeah. So you have to go to Kois Mawash. He has a does it become a dichoy? So no, if you used up yet, you chatchila pour 2 cups, you collected 2 cups, and you only end up using 1 cup. So therefore, it's dichoy, and you have to pour down the side. Or should I? Or it's not blood at all for the zrika, and therefore you just pour down the amma. Yeah. Actually, that's the other way around. Dicha means you pushed away completely, and therefore you pour down the hammer, or is it shiraim, leftovers from the blood that goes on zrika, and therefore you have to pour down the side. Melissa, Rabbi answered, this is a clear machlekes plukta the Rabbi Lazar Shimon Rabban. This is a clear argument in Rabbi Lazar Shimon Rabban. What's the story? The Tanya we learned we have 2 psukim. Lemailo, in the first pasuk it says when it talks about Nasi when he brings his carbon, it says in the pasuk there as domai, it says he should sprinkle on the mizbech his carbon. The as domai and his blood yishpach, and you pour down the yisoid. It says domai, some of the blood, not all the blood, some of the blood. Lemato, another pasuk talks about an individual brings a korban chatat. That was a nasi. When an individual brings a korban chatat, it says that's cold yishpach, all the blood. One pasuk says all the blood, and one pasuk says some of the blood. What's going on here? Menayin, she's like this. How do you decide that? This is how we work out the 2 psukim. If you, let's say you makabel the blood in 4 cases, so use each cup. But there's a lot left over in each cup. You only need a little bit from each cup because you have to do all 4 kronos. The leftovers of all those cups have to go down the side. That's cold all the leftover blood. Yochel, I would have thought. So what happens? You end up using only 1 cup. Use them. What happens to the other 3? What happens? You set up 4 cups, but the end 1 cup is enough. What happens with those 3 cups? I would have thought the same thing. You cool side. These are also shadayim. Sometimes it's only some of the blood. What does that mean? Okay, said who nishpach side? The leftover of that cup that you start using for zrika that goes to your side. But the hey nishpach lama, the rest of the blood they get poured down the amma in the canal going through his back. That's the view of the Tanakama. Comes along Rabbi Lazar but Shimon. So so clearly according to the Tanakama, you had 2 cases. You use 1 case, other case, put down the amma. Not the side. However, Rabbi Shimon says, no, I disagree. How do I know even if you only ended up using 1 cup? Nevertheless, since you designated 4 cups, they all go down the side. The S called dama yishpach. So he uses that 1 pasuk that's called dama for in all cases. So what do you do with the other pasuk? The other pasuk seems to say es dama without the kol. But see, there's dama yishpach. Rav Asher says, not all the blood. We're talking about the blood. He makes a difference. The blood that entered a kais that you're makabel, or the blood that's still sitting in the neck of the behemoth you didn't put in a cup. The blood that's still sitting in the behemoth, you don't need any more for zrika, whatever it is that goes down the amma. Blood in the cups, all the cups. So that he said, your question is a machlekes tanoim. Okay, now the Mishnah gives us the examples where you can fix it up. If a kosher gave it to the apostle, you take it back. In your left hand, take it back. Put in a clay chulin, you put in clay shadas. So you notice the principle is the same. Nothing happened here, so you just amend it. And we need it. The Ashmin apostle. If it would have said puzzle, how many would have thought my puzzle? I would have thought puzzle means tummy. I would have thought puzzle doesn't mean a koyin that is disqualified for other reasons. I would have thought just somebody's tummy, not a Yisrael tummy. The chazi lavoid at but I would have thought, you know why you can fix it up? Because we're talking about a guy who was a koyin, but it was tummy. And since there are instances where a koyin tummy can do avodah, marshal if the majority of people are tummy. So therefore, if he did it, we say, you didn't ruin the dam, you can fix it up, take it back. Aval smoil, since there's no avodah done with the left hand, like. No avodah done for tzibur with the left hand. So therefore, if you did that, you ruined it. That's what I thought. At least Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol for his avodah, at least the Kohen Gadol, not Stam Kohen, but Kohen Gadol, he uses the right hand, and the left hand has the shovel and the whole potatoes. So his left hand is involved. Aval klei choil, you can never use klei choil. Like. So therefore, maybe that ruined the blood. Yes, meaning klei choil, I would have thought, why klei choil, b'shu the chazil l'kedushini. This very keli you can fix up. Just be mekadosh it. You can't fix up blood ones right on the spot. You can't fix them up on the spot. So therefore, I would have thought they ruined it. So therefore, you need it. But the fact is that why don't we say that since you put in the left hand or clay oil, you ruined it? you were doichet. We had the concept before. Neither benitche, it was doichet. Taisa says the Gemara's question cannot be on the first case where you gave it to a kohen pasul, because we had the Gemara expression in the beginning of the Masechta that giving a kohen pasul is no different than putting it on the table. So might have given the kohen pasul, but you're allowed to put it on the table for a minute. So why can't you give it the kohen pasul? He's just standing there. He's not moving. He's just standing there. So he said the question of nitche was not on that. It's not on kohen pasul. It was on the other two cases. Okay. So why isn't it nitche? He said the name of Rabbi. I'll give you. We have a few answers. Answer number one. This follows Chon HaMitzi. Why? The less late the chuyin. He holds in all cases there's no dichin. Now what's going on here? We have a big machlek. We have Gemara Yuma. 3 opinions. You're supposed to have this 2 seirim. There's a seir Hashem and there's one to the Azazel. Seir Mishtalech. When you spray the blood of the seir Hashem, the seir Mishtalech has to be alive. From the pasuk it sounds, you say this, and then you take the seir Mishtalech. So what happens if you made the goydel, and you whatever it is, and after the goydel, one of the animals died? So there's one Tana that says, everyone says you have to bring another animal, but one Tana says you have to do the goydel all over again, because even when they're alive, they have to both be alive together. And the other one says, the other 2 Tanaim say no, you don't have to have that because man, they're alive. It's not nitche, so you just get another animal. You don't have to make another goydel. Just find another animal to be the seir Mishtalech or to be the seir Hashem. What happens? You shechted this seir Hashem, which is first, and you have the blood now in the case, and the case poured out, or the case didn't pour out, but the Mishtalech, the seir Azazel, died. Here we have now the second Tana agrees with the first Tana. In this case, you have to make a new goydel. You have to make a new goydel. And the third Tana says, no, you don't have to make a new goydel. In fact, that's Chon HaMitzi. He says that all you do is bring another animal in and continue. So the Chon HaMitzi doesn't believe in nitche. Even though the case was there, very full of blood, and the Sibirlei died, he says it's not nitche. So this one, you're asking our Mishnah why we don't say it went into klei soil. It was nitche because it goes Chon HaMitzi. The time of Chon HaMitzi, I feel it down because maybe Chavedim is like even blood in the case, you bring another one, and you just bring another animal. That's answer number one. But that's not a very good answer because that's a lone opinion against 2 other Tanaim. Comes along to Rashi, he says no. Because you can fix it up so easily. Just take it out of the clay shutters. Just take it from the left hand, put it right hand. So therefore, it's as if it's never nitche in the first place. So that's an interesting question. So how can we learn? We'll have in a chulim, but we learned before as well. What happens if you have kisei adam? And then you shechted the chaya, you shechted the chicken, it's kisei adam, the bird, it's kisei adam. A wind came and blew the sand, sawdust sand over it, and now you don't see the dam anymore. The din is that you are potter. Why don't you say that that's ensnitche, you're potter? So why don't we say that what do you call it? That since it's be a daim to remove the sand, you have a mitzvah to go ahead and go do it. So Tay's answer: there's no mitzvah whatsoever to remove the sand. The mitzvah is, if there's exposed, the dam, you have to cover it. But if there's no exposure dam, there's no mitzvah to remove the sand. So therefore, you don't say biyadoi when there's no mitzvah whatsoever. Mashayk over here, he says, we'll see at the bottom of the page, there's a mitzvah to, as we'll see, it's about the Korban Pesach, there's a mitzvah okay, wait till Korban Pesach, see what we're talking about over there. But one interesting thing is, Pesach says here, a guy who shmatzich, we're having more on head of him, a guy who shmatzich, he set it out of carbon, he ate chaylev, and then he behemoth dosai, but kivish nitche, you can't use the carbon again. So why is nitche? It's biyadei to become from again. So Pesach is an interesting thing. That even though he could become from an instant, we had the Mishnah Kedushin, Amanasha Nitzadik, and right, he can come from a second. But they says the fact in his mode of thinking right now is that interesting being from to us. That's called not biyada becoming from. It's a decision to become from, because we saw that he was Haimir, or maybe his own someone your Haimir when he shmatzich. And yeah, Amar Rav Shaya, interesting name. Makes like saying Ravashi Man Sham Rabbi Yehuda. Who's the one who says that the whole idea of the chuyin and that by Yom Kippur? It's Rabbi Yehuda. You got to do it again. That now we learned Rabbi Yehuda, and then we find more. We find my current pace. Rabbi Yehuda says Nish b'chadam. He said the blood spilled out. Yom Musamish Talech. He says if the blood spilled out, Yom Shalech or the Mishtalech died, so he says, is the boss allowed to kill the Mishtalech? You got to start all over again. New Geidel. Or Mesa Mishtalech died, Yishbachadam, pour out the blood, start all over again. So he holds of the Inav Dichli. And yet, Vishamin Lei, he the one who says, Kol Shabiyad Dichli. If you can fix it up, even though I'm the one who holds of the idea of Nitcha, but if he can fix it up, there's no Nitcha. We'd have to eat that. The Tanu Rabbi Aimer. But on Pesach, on Pesach, that you have to go ahead and there's such mayhem over there. All the Yidden, the Kabbalas and the Kainim, the whole Avodah over there. It's inevitable that some blood fell from the keli onto the floor. So Hayim Masakin, nobody knows whose blood, whatever it is. Hayim Masakin, the person who Korban Pesach. If there's no Zrika, he has no Korban Pesach. So he says you take a cup and they would collect the blood from the floor. And even though there was all kinds of blood there, take the blood and sprinkle on the Mizbech. The Chayit Nitche fell on the floor, and yet he says, and it's mixed with other bloods. He says, go ahead and use it. They would take one cup and fill it up into Terubis, and they would go ahead and sprinkle it, but where the Yisaid, the top of the Yisaid. You're not supposed to sprinkle it on the east, southeastern corner where there's no Yisaid. We'll learn about it later. You have to spread where the Yisaid is. Now, that means we don't say, oh, it fell down on the floor, got mixed up with the blood. No, he holds clearly this concept of Rabbi Yechon Kol Biyadei. So let's understand. They filled the cup. So in case one of the current pieces fell down, he fixed it up. Remember, we learned before that if it went straight from the neck to the floor, that's it. You can't use that dam. It's only if it fell in the keli and then from the keli. So they said, no, didn't blood fall directly from the neck also on the floor? So he said to them back, but no, you saying it for a fact? How do you know that? They're asking, but maybe didn't. Maybe you're trying to help out, but maybe it fell on the floor, and comes out that you're spraying puzzle of blood. You're ruining it. I'm talking about the blood that fell in the keli and fell down. So they said to him, "Go from How do you know that? You're making an allowance here to sprinkle the blood on his beach. Maybe the blood that was down that went straight into Tzavar, which then ruins the rest of the blood. You have puzzle of dam here. So whatever you're spraying in that cup, you're not benefiting anybody, because even if you have a little good blood from a keli, you also have blood from the Tzavar. So you're puzzled. So he says, name. Koyanim zrizin. Koyanim va'avdin haya. They're Koyanim zrizin. They work very, very fast. So mishtapchin. So sometimes from the keli it falls down, but they were very careful to make sure they makabel all the blood from the neck. So then he says, okay, so they were very careful with the initial blood that gushed out, but what about the blood afterwards? You have mixed into this blood all other kinds of blood. Which is not, meant to be in Mizbech. So he said to them, the first thing Mordechai tries to answer, he says, you say that dam is only dam shanefed yotzebo, and that's we get kodesh. I say that dam atamtis you also get kodesh. It's mamish blood. The time on dam atamtis bazar Allah, but you don't be kodesh. To me, it's not a problem if it's dam atamtis.
That's going there.
So therefore, it's going back as well. It's kosher if you follow this literally. Rabbi says, "Moide Rabbi Yehuda le'inyan kapara she'ein mechaper." That don't take it that far. It's only talking about the Isra of Dam. He says it's like Dam. But when it comes to the Zrika Mizbeach, it's not good Dam. Shenemer says, Dam shall never Yotzeboy, Proto Dam. When it comes to the Mizbeach and Zrika, what's Mechaper? Only the Dam that the Nefesh is in. Dam. No, Zabuda's not saying that the Nefesh goes in the Dam Atamsis. He's saying, I agree. The Dam Atamsis, there's no Nefesh. But he's saying, yeah, that's still Dam and you get a Lav. You get Kodesh. But as far as when it comes to the kapari, you need dam shanefesh yotzebo, and therefore dam hu nefesh. It says in the pasuk, so you need dam shanefesh yotzebo, and you don't have that. Elo Rabbi Yehuda Tamei Damar ein dam bevatel dam. He believes min b'minoi. I feel about so therefore you still have the good blood in there, and it's not bevatlet. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda said, now continue the conversation. Now this is very interesting. Rabbi Yehuda said to the Chachamim, so what do you say? That the blood on the floor, you can't use it anymore. So tell me, I'm asking a question. So why did they put blockages? Remember on at a Pesach, so we have the water going through, and then there's a hole in the wall, and all the water goes out constantly goes out through that hole into Nachal Kidron, and then we had Gemara Psachim. If the people down the valley there with a lot of Havana from is it Moil Behegdish or not? But according to me, they blocked it up to trap the blood so that they can save. From time to time, they would take a cup of blood and spray it on the back, so they would have the good blood. It won't be bottled because and so therefore you're good. So you saved all these people that the Kainim Zizin spilled the blood from the keli. But according to you, once it's on the floor, it doesn't help because the blood is bottled. There's a little bit of blood from the keli. There's so much other blood there that's bottled and doesn't work. So why did they block? Why did they put a blockage there? Why they blocked the whole Amalai? He said, the Chacham say, why? You know why? Because Shevachul b'nei Aaron. This is a praise. Shiyahalchu ad irkuv v'seim bedam. They should walk in soaking blood until their knees. Till their knees, they should have blood. And why? Because they're doing L'Shem Shemayim. This shows what's going on, the activity. In Sefer Torah, he has it from some Roman general or something who came to observe Pesach. And he writes it. Based on the Gemara, we had a little bit, that there were 2 million sets of kidneys there from the current Pesach. Just try to picture the whole area in a half a day, how many karbonos they had to put through, and in all that space of time, and how big of an area was it? Very small area, as we know. So it's a mile, it's a shevach to Mebishon that they go there, the kohen, and they're working and all in blood till the knees. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda asked them, "What are you talking about? Well, dam have a chatzitza. How can that be a good thing? You have to be standing on the floor, and the blood is chatzitza. The chatzitza. So when it answers lachuv chatzitza, liquid or chatzitza, because you're able to put your foot down all the way to the floor. It's not like a solid where it stands in between your foot and the floor. But now we learn hadam, blood, yoy, ink, dvash, honey, challah, milk, yivation. If they're dry, chaitzin. Lach, if they're moist, ain't chaitzin. So he says, well, the clothes become sullied, become dirty, and with nan, and we learned that it has to be covered. If their clothes was, or we learned the Baraisa, if their clothes were all filthy, the oven, because it pasnished. The Chitema, the Madlu, you can tell me they lifted their clothing, and we had an opinion. We had a machlekes if you lift your clothing under the garter, whether that's considered cut off or not. But then we learned that it has to be exact size. In other words, this follows the view that says that if you lift it, even though temporarily, you lift it on the garter, it's as if it's cut off. It has to be it has to be all the way down to the ankle. So he answered, when they walked in this blood. You know why we fill the blood? Only behalachas evarim lakevish. When they brought the limbs to the ramp, because that's not avodah. The lav avodah is not avodah. So the Gemara says, "Below is not avodah." But Tanya we learned v'hikriv hakoyin as hakoil. It says in the passage that the koyin should bring everything, and it says the zu halachas evarim lakevish. That's talking about bringing the evarim to the ramp. Now, definitely on the mizbeach itself was an avodah, but the Gemara thought that the leading to the mizbeach is not an avodah, which a little bit you have to understand with the svara, because by blood we say the kabbalah is an avodah and the halach also is an avodah. Even though you don't have to, you can shech right next to the mizbeach. But we had before, even Mahu the tame a few times is not. But we say no, lepoil, you can get the blood from here, point A to point B to the mizbeach without walking, so it becomes an avodah. And yet the Gemara had a havim in here that the halach is avodim to the kedesh is not an avodah. On the mizbeach is an avodah. The Haktorah, but the halach is not.
Practically, the whole.
But the point of this
is full of blood.
Oh, well, you more ask a second. And in Elabelach is 80 Lamaracha. But talking about, you know what? You're right. The animal itself, that's an avodah. We're talking about bringing the wood to burn on top of the pyre. The lav avodah. That's not an avodah. Okay. So you might ask the question, okay, but the fact is it's full of blood. And the fact is that they're all dirty and everything else. You don't have dirty clothes. But Ozli I try to work this out. They had formations in the Chotzer Azara rocks that they came out of the ground because it's still. So they all stood not on the floor. They stood on these. It was raised higher than the knee. So you have to be higher than the knee so you get no blood because they shouldn't get dirty. So they were raised, and every kohen was standing on another one of these things. So it's on the floor because it's avonim at the end of the day. How many of these rocks? How many of them were there? That is the ground that stood up. It couldn't be a separate rock or detached, because then that's a chatzitza. It's the floor of itself. I just tried to picture. It's even more dangerous. So you have hundreds and hundreds of kohanim hundreds of thousands of Yidden standing there, and they're all standing on these rocks. They have to balance themselves, and the Kalim went back and forth. Interesting, when we say the current Pesach, it doesn't mention a word about this, about these things here. But that's what it said. That's what they did.
Only mentioned the Korban Pesach, I suppose.
Yeah. What happened the rest of the year?
No Shabbat.
No, or the rest of the year, these rocks were there. So it was a how far? And the way we live in Siddur Pesach, we have the Kohanim pass. They all stood there and they passed. That means they have to be pretty close to each other. Because if they have to pass like this, you could fall down. Try to picture what was going on there. And when you look at all these diagrams in this bear, the floor is level. You never see any pictures in this bear. We have all these, many of them. There have to be many.
Back they were.
Yeah, but talking about when you have where the shechita is, that's in front of the base of Bigdish, to the Shanikna, that whole area. What happened? I don't know. Try to picture. Okay, we'll pause for